Referring to someone as a good egg actually only exists to declare someone as the opposite of a bad egg, a phrase dating at least to the mid 1800s.
Daddy wasn't finding a bow wow. Daddy wasn't finding a bow wow. I love my little cat. I'm very fond of that. I'd rather have a big bow wow 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 wow.
Hello, and welcome to the Mocciaverse. I'm Linette.
And I'm Skip.
You are. We're still Skip, and I'm still Linette. Isn't that weird?
Oh my God. One time in a row.
Time in a row. I think it's been like 5 or 6. I don't even know
Yeah,
anymore.
I
I don't even know. No, nobody's listening, including us. So we are here again to figure out the origins of some of the weird things we say, or origins of phrases. Part 2, Electric Boogaloo. Anyone?
Yep.
Anyone?
Part 2. Yep.
Part 2. So we really liked doing this before. I really enjoyed it, and some of the feedback we got, other people really enjoyed it. So I thought we'd go back into the vault and find a few more sayings that maybe we still use, maybe we sometimes use, or at least we're aware of people using, and kind of find out what it's supposed to mean, or what people on the internet think it's supposed to mean, and maybe find out what they really mean. So I guess here we go. So the one we're going to start with is rule of thumb. I mean, this is something, I think we use this slightly differently now.
Yeah. Rule of thumb, it's used kind of differently now. It's just like, it's kind of how we've done it before. That's what later people talk about.
Yeah, because when you read the descriptions of it, it says like approximation of measurement, but like, I feel like that's not how we say rule of thumb in our everyday lives, because I actually do use it a lot. And usually when I'm saying it, I say things like the rule of thumb of this is, which is like, here's the way we do it.
Yeah, precise. It's more precise than an estimation when you say it. Yeah.
Right. And so I think maybe that derives from what they think the original meaning was like measuring by estimation, as opposed to measuring by an actual measuring tool. So using something else besides your measuring tool to do a measurement, kind of like on the fly, right? The way you would in a profession, like if you were like a builder or something like that, you would kind of eyeball it, or you would use literally your thumb to say, yeah, that's about the right distance for this piece of whatever.
Yeah, I think that in my experience, when you're a do-it-yourselfer and you don't have the tape measure with you at a particular time, you would use a bunch of things. We talk about thumb. You use something like if you close your fist, the distance across your knuckles is approximately 4 inches. The distance from the tip of your fingers to your elbow is 18 inches. Those kind of things is like, you can do really quickly. And I think we talk about like the length of a paper bill, 6 inches.
Once I learned that, I use it like for things, because I can never find my measuring tape. We always put it in a different place whenever we use it.
Yeah, and it's fairly typical that you do that. A measuring tape is, yes, it's nice to have around, but like you say, it's not always at your fingertips.
Or your thumb tips.
Or thumb tips, yeah. So it's those kind of things are used a lot by do-it-yourselfers, to make a quick measurement. There are others, but those are the ones that come to my mind really quickly. And it's amazing how many times I'll use the 4-inch one across my hand, or the one from tip of my fingers to my elbow for 18 inches. It's just amazing how many times you just use it automatically, especially when you don't have to be precise.
Yeah, if you're not doing something really, really important. I can't tell you how many times I've done the thing where I want to see how big something is in relation to like whether it'll fit. And so I take the thing and I have my 2 hands, and then I try to hold them in the same position as I move myself over to the space it needs to go, saying, yeah, that'll fit there.
And I laugh because that changes as you move.
It changes instantly. Like the minute you take your hands off of it, they're closer together. And then you try to like hold yourself still like some kind of weirdo as you're walking across the room going, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So rule of thumb. So it also has like a dark mythology attached to it, but we'll get to that. Possibly it may have originated the fact that we say the phrase quite a long time ago, like in the 1600s. The earliest use of it in writing that we can find is from a collection of sermons from a Scottish preacher named James Durham. And he preached in the mid 1600s that, and this is a quote, many professed Christians are like to foolish builders who build by guess and by rule of thumb, as we used to speak, and not by square and rule. So this guy is sort of saying that Christians, the ones he's preaching to, they should follow the exact words of the Bible rather than winging it like some kind of foolish builder, which struck me as funny because famously the guy that he's probably talking about is a carpenter. But, who am I? I'm not a religious person, and this is not a religious podcast. So it's actually possible that the original meaning was very simple. It, like we talked about, builders or other tradespeople, if they didn't have their tools handy, or rather than using measuring tools, they'd often estimate during the process using their own thumb as an approximate measurement. Probably not during the entire process of building, because otherwise you'd have some problems. And certainly not during the process of building something important like a bridge or a cathedral or something. But like, if you're building a little structure in your backyard, or you're just throwing something together quickly and sort of eyeball it. I feel like, so my grandfather on my mom's side would totally build like a shed based on the rule of thumb. I know you guys built that outhouse, and I'm sure you measured stuff because you were part of it, but like my grandfather, rest his soul.
Yeah.
He would
He would have.
Yeah, I feel like he would have used like leftover fencing and an old door and like all those lawnmower cords that he used to run over and like tape together with electrical tape, keep using.
Yeah, I think when we built that, it was, straight pieces of plywood, 4x8 pieces of plywood for the, because we made it out of an A-frame to look like an A-frame.
It was a beautiful outhouse, and it lasted a very long time. I told you the last time we went up to the cottage, oh God, I don't know how many years ago now. It was before me and Richard, but like maybe 10 years ago, it was still there. And they were using it, the neighbors were using it while they were building their house there.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, which is really, really cool. I love that it was still there all those years later.
Yeah, it was sort of amazing. I want to say that was probably my first foray into building a structure, but come up pretty good.
Anyway. Yeah, it's beautiful. It lasted longer than that house.
Yep.
In Salem, so they had to gut that thing. Yeah. And my grampy, he was just a do-it-yourself kind of guy, but he was never formally trained.
Yep.
And so, that's just the way you did things back then when you had to make do. It gives me good memories thinking about it anyway. Although I think I heard a story that my Uncle Rich actually fell through the ceiling once when he was a kid.
Your Uncle Eddie and I actually, that might have been through the bathroom, because we actually rebuilt the bathroom floor because it was all falling apart. So maybe that's when it happened. I don't know.
The place, yeah, and it's true, like the memory sometimes can be muddy. But the place that told me it happened was that his legs came through the kitchen ceiling. So whatever was above, it was probably a bedroom.
Yeah, I think that was at one point, it was the the parents' bedroom was right there, and his bedroom was off that.
The one that was, if you go into the little offshoot.
Yeah.
Oh, this is interesting to only us, but hey, this is what this is what you come here for, folks. Yep. Get a little glimpse into the Mocciaverse. It's not even the Moccia family, but that's fine. It's the Mocciaverse. So the phrase, it stuck around. It seemed to be in use just forever, extending into writing well into the 1600s, 1700s. And it was also, you see it referred to in textiles. And I could totally see that where, you're measuring some cloth and you would use your thumb. You're making just that extra little bit that you're going to fold over for a seam or something. So it's funny because beyond the practical use, I mean, it's pretty clear what it would be used for in real life. But like what was really amusing was how it was used in writing so much to criticize people or insult people. Basically like all these examples I saw, like the preacher and like some others, they were sort of they were using it to say, well, you don't do things the right way. You just kind of do things like some sort of tradesperson, you know, which is like, okay, take it easy, sir. Like, you know, you have a profession too. Maybe, you know, your profession is so much better than everybody else's, but I'm sure you could just take it down a notch. Like there was one in the late 1600s, William Hope, I guess he was writing a book about fencing, the art of fencing.
Mhm.
And he said, quote, what he doth by rule of thumb and not by art. Like whoever it was that he's complaining about, clearly not dothing it right, right? And was no artist like he obviously was. And, you know, in fencing, I mean,
Right.
like, you know, you don't know fencing. I only know fencing. And you guys are just a bunch of amateurs and I doth it the right way. There was a slightly nicer one from Kelly's Scottish Proverbs, 1791, that said, there was no rule so good as the rule of thumb, which is like, okay, it's like you're kind of giving you advice like, hey, live your life. So, I mean, I kind of get that, you know, somebody saying there's no good rule as a rule of thumb sounds nice and positive, but of course it is a proverb. Proverbs aren't really meant to tell you the right way to, they're not really meant to tell you the exact perfect way to live your life. It's more like, hey, man, this is what life is really like, you know? So I don't know. I kind of dig that. So beyond all of that, for some reason, maybe close to like the 1800s, this rule of thumb thing took on a really dark meaning. And this is the one that you find every time you search online because it went so viral after some of these people put it in there. It shows up on Facebook timelines, those whole did you know things. Definitely crap, definitely bullshit. But also like really dark and like a terrible thing to have been just in the zeitgeist for so many centuries. So the dark origin that keeps getting repeated in hundreds of articles, books, everywhere. I mean, it's literally everywhere you look, is that there's this law on the books, and it doesn't even say where, that it's legal for a husband to beat his wife so long as the stick or implement that he beats her with is no thicker than his thumb, right? And I'm sure we've all heard this, like we've seen it online. Wikipedia refers to this by saying it's a modern folk etymology that holds that the phrase is derived from the maximum width of a stick allowed for wife beating under English common law, but no such law ever existed. So, and that's an important distinction, the difference between common law and law on the books. And then there was this rumored statement in the 18th century by Judge Sir Francis Buller, not sure how it's pronounced, that a man may beat his wife with a stick no wider than his thumb. The only problem is there's no record that he ever even said that. So, and so he may have never said it. He's rumored to have said it. And you pointed this out to me. All of these political cartoons and commentary cartoons sprung from it.
Yep.
A lot of examples in different sources of these cartoons. So, you know, there's no official law on the books, but you could find tons of judgments that came down from it, like actual court judgments. And of course, there was the, you know, Bueller or Buller or whatever his name is, being nicknamed Judge Thumb. And in all the satirical cartoons, like there was one that he's like, you know, he's got this big stick and he's like terrorizing women and children. There's one that's the little caption says, "Who wants a cure for a nasty wife? Here's a nice family amusement for winter evenings." And the woman's shouting murder. And a man shouts back, "Murder, eh? It's law, you." And it just says B. So I'm assuming bitch, which is great. It's law, you bitch. It's not bigger than my thumb. Which is like, whoa, take it down a notch. Take it down a thumb a notch.
Yeah, it is. You know, it's kind of strange. I think there was another one here. I think I don't know if you got a chance to talk about it. I like this. Some other dude in the 1700s, the jurist William Blackstone wrote the Commentaries of Laws of England, that by an old law, husband had formerly been justified in using moderate correction against his wife, but he was barred from inflicting serious violence. Blackstone did not mention either thumbs or sticks. According to Blackstone, this custom was in doubt by the late 1600s,
Mhm.
And a woman was allowed security of the peace against her abusive husband.
Right.
And a scholar, legal scholar, William Prosser from the 20th century, wrote that probably there's no truth to the legend, which is we keep talking about, that a husband was allowed to beat his wife with a stick, no thicker than a thumb. So this is all kind of made up. And what was kind of crazy is what you said earlier was that there were actually court rulings that were referencing this that didn't even exist.
Well, and this is the thing that can really get you deep into this, because here you have a rumor of something someone said about a law that's not really a law, but it's a common law. And if it's repeated enough times, it can result in real life things happening to real people in a court of law, because these judges are just like, it's an old law. I mean, there's a law there somewhere on the books that says you can do it. And it would actually result in actual problems for real people. And this thing about this thing with Blackstone, saying a woman was allowed security of the peace against an abusive husband. Yeah, I'm sure on the book she was allowed that. But I know enough about history to know, and up until very modern times, you're allowed protection, but that doesn't mean you get protection.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean you ever are protected. And we all know how women were thought of for the whole time.
All this makes me, flash back to some other crazy things, what I consider crazy things that you've seen from time to time, even like in a real estate law, where if you have two properties that are adjoining, and at one point you allow somebody to drive through the center of your property.
Yeah.
If they keep driving through it, all of a sudden it becomes a right of way and not your property anymore.
Right, like squatters' rights almost.
Right, and it doesn't have any. I'm sure now it has legal precedence, but from a logical standpoint, you're trying to be a good neighbor, but then all of a sudden you lose something from being a good neighbor, and I think it's because, like, it makes me flash to this here, where you say something enough times, then people believe it's true. It's like the mudslinging you see in politics.
Oh, sure.
You throw enough mud on the wall, something's bound to stick and be true. And if you say it enough times, next thing you know, you're being called this, or they're saying you did this and that and the other thing, and you really didn't. So anyway.
Well, look at all the stuff that happens. And I don't want to get too deep into this. I don't want to be too political or anything, but it's just a fact of life. No matter what side you affiliate yourself with, people saying stuff, and then it turns into standards of practice in medicine. I mean, even just a small example with COVID. When COVID was happening, of course, it's understandable that there's going to be a lot of misinformation out there because it was a new thing we were learning about. But you've got certain drugs that just someone, for whatever reason he wanted to, put a thing out there that said this works 100% of the time. And then before you know it, you tell two friends, and your friends tell two friends, and your friends tell two friends, and so on and so on. And before you know it, I got doctors writing prescriptions for this drug. And the FDA has to step in and be like, and the CDC has to step in and be like, yeah, it's not indicated for that. Stop it. But you can't stop it. And then as soon as you try to do that, then you got somebody going on TV, or you going online saying, like, they're trying to kill us. They're not allowing us to be cured. It's this one fact that the doctors don't want you to know. And it's like, okay, all right. And again, I don't want to go
crazy,
too deep, but it's like it's the same thing.
It absolutely is. And I think I don't know if you had mentioned this, and correct me if you've already mentioned it, about the 1824 ruling court ruling in Mississippi. It stated a man was entitled to enforce domestic discipline by striking his wife with a whip or a stick no wider than the judge's thumb.
Yeah.
In a later case in North Carolina, State versus Rose, 1868, the defendant was found to have struck his wife with a switch about the size of his fingers. The judge found the man not guilty due to the switch being smaller than a thumb. The judgment was upheld by the state Supreme Court.
Right.
I mean, seriously, dudes. I mean, it's it's amazing. There's not even anything on the laws, but then it becomes a precedent.
Right. Yeah. And that's where it's dangerous, because once
Right.
it becomes a thing, then you could go back to it and say, well, in this case it worked, and then it can happen again.
Yep.
It's it's really creepy. It's really scary, you
Yep.
know.
So that,
Yeah. So, it all started probably because somebody wanted to sell more newspapers, which is like, oh gosh, that old chestnut, you know.
hmm. Yeah, it's crazy, so like you said, this rule of thumb definitely took a dark turn.
It did, and
And
it was like I was all, I'm reading and I'm like, oh, I can't wait to debunk this. But unfortunately, you can debunk the origin of it, but now you can't debunk the use of it because it's definitely been used that way. So I guess all the people on the internet are right, and that's what it means now.
yeah, I mean, you find that it's just like the myth gets repeated in a 1982 report by
Hmm.
the United States Commission on Civil Rights, you
Yeah.
know, under the rule of thumb, and then there's a United States Senate report on the Violence Against Women Act. And then
And
in
once you put
20,
that stuff in writing, that's
yeah,
it. Now it
yeah,
is. Now it's a thing, right?
now it's a thing. So anyway, we kicked the crap out of that one.
We did. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of really interesting information when I was looking at that. And if it hadn't been so late at night, I would have gone into an even deeper rabbit hole on it. But there is a book that I wanted to shout out that you talked about in your notes. It was called Origins of the Specious, which I really love that title. Myths and Misconceptions of the English Language. And it was by Patricia T. O'Connor and Stuart Kellerman. I looked at that book briefly, and I'm definitely going to be buying that book because it looks really fascinating. It looks like it talks about a lot of things that we have been covering on our show. And so I guess watch this space, folks. We're going to have
There you
more.
go. So you want to do one for the road? Maybe that'll go quickly.
Yeah, let's do one for the road.
Many, and I mean many sources online that have repeated the story, one for the road, refers to a practice of offering a drink to a condemned man.
Right.
It's stories, it goes back in history that a man was by cart to the gallows and he was offered one last drink for the road before he met his end. The story was like, went so far as to talk about a specific pub in England that proudly served the condemned man their last tipple.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a purported origin of being on the wagon, which we know to refer as someone who's currently abstaining from drinking. So the thought is that if, when transported by cart past the pub, offered the drink, refused, he was on the wagon because he didn't stop to get the drink.
Right, which is it's a nice story.
Yeah. Here's the thing, though. It's all bunk.
Yeah, it is. It is. It totally is. I mean, it sounds really nice. It really shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who learns a thing or two about history, especially English or European history. There really wasn't a tradition of being nice or courteous to condemned men.
Yep.
It's not like they were like, these people, they were hauled out of their prison cells, likely after weeks of either starvation or filthy deprivation and beatings, thrown unceremoniously on a horse cart or dragged through the town amid jeering onlookers who came to town just for the pleasure of seeing a man die. These people were rowdy, drunk, screaming and yelling, throwing things, and really enjoying the torment of this guy, right? They brought their families, they served refreshments, they saw it as an entertainment and felt justified doing so because this was part of the prisoner's punishment, right? The humiliation and cruelty was supposed to be their last experience on earth. Now, knowing all of this, it should be clear that there was no atmosphere of, hey, let's give this poor guy one more drink for the road, like his last road. It doesn't really track, especially not in medieval times up until whenever. I'm sure you've heard of the tradition of like executioners sort of offering small pleasures for the condemned, like that cigarette that they give you right before the firing squad. But I feel like a firing squad thing is more like, and I could be corrected if I'm wrong, but when it's like a wartime thing, the firing squad specifically would have most likely have been other soldiers firing at them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like a peer of the condemned. So like you can have empathy for somebody that you have to shoot because it's your job to shoot this guy because of whatever he did. maybe he was trying to run away, which you could totally identify with, right? In the middle of this terrible war. Here, buddy, have a cigarette, right? I
You know,
guess.
I'm laughing because it just makes me flash. In the military, you get stopped and they say, "Smoke them if you got them."
Smoke them
Okay,
if you
go
got
ahead.
them. Yep.
Okay.
That's like, it's all over, guys. Smoke them if you got them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I actually say that at work a lot too, because I feel like sometimes things are just going to end.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, and also like the tradition of the last meal for somebody who's being executed. I don't really think that's not necessarily I guess it could be a kindness, but of course we're not in medieval times. We don't treat our prisoners exactly the same way that we used to treat them in medieval times. Um,
Mm.
it's not great, but I think the last meal of somebody who's going to be executed is just as much, it's for show, but it's just as much like the people who are doing it, it's their way of kind of saying, hey, I'm doing this nice thing while I'm also killing somebody in the name of the state, like I may be doing this thing, but it is my job. And what, I'm going to be a decent human being and make sure he has his very favorite meal first. That's the least you can do. And
Yep.
there's a lot of morality in there that's shaky. I don't really think that's like a kindness necessarily. Maybe on an individual level. I mean, we've all seen the Green Mile. We know that, there could be characterizations of people who run like a death row that are sympathetic and nice people and treat the prisoners nicely. I'm not so sure the origins of giving somebody their last meal kind of justifies the whole idea of it being a truth of, their last pint kind of thing from,
Yeah.
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 I guess it could have happened a couple of times. Maybe there was somebody in the past, maybe there's a story or two where somebody was being executed and the general public, or maybe some of the proprietors of the town, didn't agree with the sentence. So they individually would have offered the
Yeah.
man a
Yeah.
last drink. I could see that happening because like, not everybody agrees with the things that are going down when somebody gets tried and sort of sentenced to hanging. I'm sure there were times when somebody was hanged that maybe didn't do it, or maybe it was considered, maybe it was one of them, maybe it
Yeah.
was the guy who owned the pub.
Yeah,
he,
but
he
yeah,
did something
so
and they like, hey, listen, let's just get this guy one for the road, and it became a story.
it became a story, but likely it's not true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most of us look at this one for the road as like you're at a bar or you're a salesman or whoever you are, and you want to take one more drink for the road. Now,
Yeah.
obviously,
Yeah, that's bad too.
nowadays that becomes a whole nother thing,
Yes.
about drinking and driving.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
it actually makes more sense to say that's that one for the road, because that's usually where we use it. Hey, we're on our way. Let's take one more for the road.
Yeah, and it's usually not even like alcohol anymore, like the way
Yeah.
that I think of it. Like, usually it's a bathroom stop.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's take one more.
All right, we're
One more
gonna head
pit
out.
stop.
Yeah, one more
whatever.
pit stop for the road. Or we'll say like, hey, do you want one for the road? Like, you want to take a bottle of water with you because you're driving all the way from Ocala to Daytona Beach.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or some coffee so you don't fall asleep on the road. Maybe I could see how it's more relevant to coffee than it would be to alcohol
Right.
nowadays. But I can also see, based on how shitty people are, that it definitely has referred to alcohol many, many, many times.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's see. So the next one is wear your heart on your sleeve, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So I feel like we've all used this. This one had some interesting origins. You did the bulk of the research on this one. So if you want
Yeah. What kind of sleeve are we talking about?
to,
And
right.
why in a sleeve and not in a pants sleeve or around your neck? No clear answer to that one, I guess.
I wear my heart on my back butt pocket.
Yeah. There are other places it could be. But many legends attempt to get at the heart. Is it Valentine's Day?
Right. Maybe.
I guess there was three of the most popular stories that are associated with this. In the Middle Ages, Emperor Claudius II believed that unattached men made better soldiers, so he declared marriage illegal. As a concession, he encouraged temporary coupling. Once a year, during the Roman festival honoring Juno, men drew names to determine who would be their lady friend for the coming year. Once established, the man would wear her name on his sleeve for the rest of the festival.
Oh, okay. That sounds
It's
cute. And
kind of
also,
cool.
yeah, it sounds
I mean, it's
this
cool in one
was
way, but you know,
well, also weird, but it's Romans. I mean,
yeah,
Romans were weird. And I'm trying to think about which era of the Roman sort of historical timeline this was. It said Middle Ages, so that would be like during Christianity for the Roman times. Because
it could be, yeah,
yeah, the Romans were
and
funny because they hung on to a lot of pagan traditions, and that sounds pagan to me.
yeah, which is this makes sense around the same time when a knight performed a jousting match on the king's court. He dedicated his performance to a woman. Now we've seen that before
Oh,
and
sure.
shown in pictures and other stories by tying something of hers like a handkerchief around his arm, and he'd let the court know the match would defend the honor of the woman.
Yeah, that sounds right.
That that sounds pretty good. That sounds like a bar. It actually we've seen that. Like I say, we've seen that shown in movies.
My favorite example of that is like a almost like a satire of it, and it's actually really beautiful in
Mhm.
uh it's in the book, but also more people are familiar with the movie Man of La Mancha, right?
Mhm.
Peter O'Toole. When he's under the delusion that he's a knight, and he happens upon this, it's an inn, but he thinks it's a castle. And he meets this woman that he's just absolutely in love with, who he thinks is, sort of a lady. And she's a kitchen maid, but she's also a sex worker. And, you know,
Yeah.
yeah, Aldonza, who he calls
Mm.
Dulcinea, right?
Right.
And he says, he's a knight and he's about to go on a quest. And so would she be so kind as to give him like a token, some sort of, and she's like, well, what are you talking about? She's asking his, Sancho, well, what do you mean? What is this? And he says, well, it's usually a piece of fabric or, like a scarf or something like that. And she throws him like a dirty, wet kitchen towel. And he's like, Sancho's like, oh, come on, lady, that's rude. But then he gives it to Don Quixote kind of like sheepishly, like, here, this is what she gave me. And Don Quixote's like, the purest gossamer garment, I shall wear it. He puts it on his head, and then he puts the golden helmet of Membrino on his head, which is it's a shaving basin. And he's like, oh, this is so beautiful. And it's obviously in a way making fun of him, but I also think it's the most gorgeous thing because he's completely off his rocker, but in such a beautiful way because he's living his best life and he's living such a life of joy and
Yep.
looking at the positive of all these things, and everybody around him's like, what the hell? I need to watch that movie again. It's one of my favorite movies.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good one. Yeah.
But yeah, so
Eh,
yeah.
And then there's the one of Shakespeare, and I don't know if you want to read this. You're usually better at reading these kind of things because this is from Act One in Othello.
Oh, Othello. Okay.
Yeah.
I've never read Othello, so everybody be kind to me. That's one of the ones I've missed. I know the storyline sort of. But Iago says, it is as sure as you are Rodrigo. Were I the Moor, I would not be Iago. In following him, I follow but myself. Heaven is my judge, not I for love and duty, but seeming so for my peculiar end. For when my outward action doth demonstrate the native act and figure of my heart, in compliment extern, 'tis not long after, but I will wear my heart upon my sleeve, for daws to peck at. I am not what I am. Sounds deep.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
I
do
know
love
it.
Shakespeare. I know a lot of people are intimidated by it, but it's lovely. So that's Act One, Scene 1, 56 through 65. So in the play, which was around 1603, I think that sounds late. Wasn't it more
Yeah.
like the 1400s Shakespeare? Anyway.
Yeah. That's weird. Yeah, because they call it 1603. So maybe there's
Oh, it says the
uh,
play. So maybe it's
yeah.
like the adaptation. Iago confesses to treacherous acts. That's hard. And says that wear my heart upon my sleeve, or truly exposing himself. He's basically invited black crow-like birds to peck away at him. See, now that makes a lot of sense to me as a use of that phrase. And of course, it's Shakespeare because it makes sense. most people wouldn't agree with what I just said. But to me, it makes sense. Wearing your heart on your sleeve, because your heart is your true feelings, right? And
Right.
putting something on your sleeve means it's visible to everyone. So it makes sense that saying, wear my heart on my sleeve means I'm exposing my true self for everyone to see. It's like, yeah, go Shakespeare. You know how to say it. I agree with that. Was this cut and
You want me to
pasted?
read this?
Was it cut and
Uh,
pasted? Because if it is, you may not want to read it because you'd be plagiarizing.
It's so true.
I know. It's okay. Let's say
You know,
quote. Let's say quote.
this quote, this is a quote. So maybe, just maybe, see, I changed it.
Oh, good.
This Valentine's Day, forego Hallmark cards, Russell Stover chocolates,
It
which
says
makes me want to
flavor.
go get some Russell Stover.
Yeah,
What's
and it
that?
says flavorless Russell Stover chocolate.
I know
So
it.
is
It
this
does.
person
Yeah.
eating
It's-
Russell
I
Stover?
left that out because they're not flavorless, not in my
Right.
mind.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Come on. Take a risk of let the doors have their way by fixing your darling's name onto your arm, or better yet, do a tattoo.
Yeah, with the person's name on it. That's a good
Yeah.
idea. Okay, I am going to look up what daws actually are.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, it's a bird, a jackdaw. So there was a
Okay.
bird called a jackdaw.
Okay. Yeah. So many times we've seen in movies or TV shows where somebody gets a tattoo and has the person's name on it, and hopefully it's spelled right, and then they break up with that person.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when I've been to tattoo shops, they actually sometimes will have signs, or at least they'll say, like, yeah, if you come in here wanting a person's name, I'm going to say no unless it's your kid.
Yeah, and that's a good point. It's a good policy to have because, quite honestly, it's easy enough to be enamored or in love or wherever you want to call it at that particular time with someone that you feel like you want to put their name on your chest, where it's no guarantee that the relationship's going to last as long as the tattoo.
Oh, exactly. And then you have to get another tattoo that like puts a big circle and a thing through it, like a Ghostbusters circle through it.
Or an
A
arrow
slash.
pointing to it. Never mind.
Sucks. It says sucks. You just put the person's name and then it just says sucks underneath it.
Yeah, yeah.
But you have to spell it SUX and it has to be in Comic Sans. Interesting. I
Yep.
I don't know about you, but I like all of those different possibilities of origins. I'm gonna go with Shakespeare.
Yep. Yeah,
Not just
think that
because it's
could.
older, but because there's a lot of people who think that the works of Shakespeare weren't written by just one person. There's a lot of arguments about like multiple people wrote some of Shakespeare's works.
Yeah.
But if you take it by rote that Shakespeare was one dude, I mean, he definitely had a way of wording things because it's endured so much. Like, I want to do an episode actually of things that Shakespeare said that we still use today or that we still say and they're still relevant because he pretty much wrote the English language.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. But yeah, I'm going to go with Shakespeare on that one. The other ones are fine, but I'll go with Shakespeare.
Okay. Giving the cold shoulder.
Yes, giving the cold shoulder. We know what that means, sort of like, kind of either ignoring somebody completely or turning your back on them or just not being super nice, I guess,
Yeah.
is what it means. But where it comes from, kind of murky, of course. See, this is funny because this is the one I totally bought. Because I guess, I don't know, because it was historic or whatever. It's repeated in several non-academic or non-scientific books of etymology that the common explanation is that it stems from serving a cold shoulder of mutton or like cold meat to guests that you aren't really super happy that are there, right?
Mhm.
Which kind of makes sense. If you want to show someone that you're not really enthusiastic about them being there, you'd give them the cold shoulder. I can also see why that wouldn't be 100% true because everything that I've read, and when I first saw it, I said, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, you're going to serve cold stuff to somebody you're not really happy about being there. Here's the thing, like, depending on what century you're talking about, serving cold meat, like for lunch, was not insulting. It was not unusual. And it was actually pretty normal, like to not serve a huge banquet of like immediately prepared stuff. It was more normal to go visiting at someone's house and there being some like just some cold meat and like vegetables and stuff on the table. I mean, Pepys wrote it about it in his diary. Like half the time he was going over someone's house and eating cold stuff. And Pepys was a guy who wrote this. He just wrote a bunch of journals in the 1600s. Turned out to be just this huge historical document because he actually documented like the Great Fire of London, and many, many things that happened in the 1600s. And it's used as reference to just pretty much everything that happened during that time, just because all he did was write stuff and he wrote absolute minutia of detail about every day. And I read Pepys' diary. There's actually a lot of really rude stuff in there, like a lot of rude stuff. But what is interesting is that he talks about where he goes for dinner all the time. And he talks about eating cold mutton all the time, like constantly. So did everybody hate him? No, probably not. He was probably pretty annoying, but I don't think everybody hated him. So yeah, that makes sense that that's not really true.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree with you. That makes more sense as far as the origin goes. I just think it over the years, just like a lot of sayings, they change to mean something different. And the reality is, if you think about it, that if it was served to an unwanted guest, it's saying the same thing, that you're turning your back on someone because you don't want them.
Right.
So there's a bit of a correlation between the two.
Yeah, that does make sense. And I can see how somebody would think that that would be connected. And there's probably some writing, probably in some Jane Austen stuff about being dismissive to somebody by giving them cold food when they come over. But but I still think, especially if you're talking about the 1600s, look, the way people ate was all over the place, you know.
Yeah, true. And like in the previous story, we talked about how the rule of thumb, how it came to this thing about disciplining your wife, that over the years, people use that as being aloof or ignoring somebody. So it becomes the norm as opposed to what the original story is. It's kind of how we use it. I won't say daily life, maybe daily life.
Sure. Depending on who you are and how bitchy you are. Right.
Exactly. You know, where you give the cold shoulder to somebody, which is basically turn your back on them. It's better than giving them the stink eye, but
it's just sneering at them and then turning your shoulder. But I did like this other sort of origin where it talks about the etymology of the word. They think it might have been a mistranslation of an expression from the Vulgate Bible, which I've never heard of. I think it had to do with the word shoulder and where it came from. The word for back was also very similar. And so turning your back on someone, turning your shoulder on someone, I mean, either way, that's the same kind of thing. And when you're turning away from someone, you're showing them the cold part, because the warm part is your face and your personality and your engagement with them. And the cold part is, here's my back, you know. So I get that it could have come from a mistranslation. I mean, lots of things could have come from a mistranslation. I read, and we could talk about this sometime in the future, the story of Cinderella. The glass slipper could have very likely not been a glass slipper because it was translated from an old version of the French language, in which the word for fur and the word for glass were kind of similar words. So the person who translated it called it a glass slipper instead of like a fur slipper, which would make more sense that you would have shoes made out of fur or material than out of glass, because it's not like, you know, it's just a weird thing to have shoes made out of.
By the way, Vulgate it's a Latin version of the Bible.
Oh, okay.
Prepared in the late 4th century and revised in 1592 and adopted as the official text of the Roman Catholic Church.
Back then, or in 1692?
And revised in 1592.
1592. Okay. Yeah. Well, that makes sense. And that also makes sense about translation. I mean, you can imagine a word from the 4th century being misinterpreted as another word from, you know, much later. That makes sense.
I think mostly if it's used in the Catholic Church, it's used where that's still doing Latin, and they didn't convert to English. So
right. Okay.
That's why. Okay.
That sounds right. There's a little bit of credence to it.
Yep.
I mean, I want to say that as much as it sounds cool to have mutton being the origin of giving someone the cold shoulder, I think it's a little too creative for for that to have really been the origin. I think it's probably as simple as you're turning your back on someone and now that's cold.
Yeah, and it could be the way you treat an uninvited guest, or a guest that you really don't want as a guest, the one that shows up all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not all the time, but shows up when you don't want them to. So
Yeah, which is like, I don't know. If I had an unwanted guest, like I don't have guests, but if I had somebody who showed up all the time and I kept giving them like cold cuts or whatever, I feel like they'd still keep showing up because like cold cuts are expensive.
well, see, the thing is though, cold cuts by our modern term is different than cold mutton. It's like the way we're used to nowadays. You think about this is your preference having a chicken leg that's warmed up or cold?
Right, right.
You know,
And of course, they didn't have refrigeration, so it wasn't even really cold.
right,
It was just hanging in the larder. You just took it out of the larder,
right.
and it wasn't hot under the fire.
Yep.
Right. Which is like, yeah, I'm not making this effort. Okay, okay. I mean,
Yep.
actually, yeah, I guess that would be. But again, I've seen so many literary references to it being so common to eat things that weren't prepared or heated up, just to have a table full of like they referred to as cold things, that I'm not entirely convinced that that was a gesture of ill will. I'm not sure. It seems to me like it was fairly normal, unless you're talking about different classes, right? So maybe the higher class you are, the less likely you are to put less effort into a guest. And so if it was a high class household and you're giving them sort of unprepared stuff that you just grabbed out of your larder, maybe that would be an insulting way to show them, yeah, I really don't care that you're here. But if it was a regular person, working class, and they were just like, yeah, hey, come on in, this is all I have. Oh, isn't that nice, you're giving me your food. So maybe it's a class distinction thing.
Okay.
So I guess we don't have a conclusion on that, folks.
No, I guess you don't. It's weird. I've used the term so many times that we particularly just talking about as being, from sheep. But in looking at the definition of it, it's meat that from sheep that's older than 1 year, ideally 3 years old.
Oh, you mean mutton?
Yeah, mutton. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's has a high amount of fat, strong flavor.
It was very common
used,
to eat to have
yeah.
mutton.
I mean, I think the other part is, really it used to be the mainstay of Europe and the United States. And it's the way it's done is long, slow cooking.
Well, that makes sense because you can't really keep stuff forever. So if you learn how to prepare it a certain way, sort of like what more southern parts of Europe, like Italy, for instance, did with pigs, is there's a lot of curing going on.
Yeah.
Because like a lot of cured meats came out of certain regions of Italy. Where's Parma? I can't remember whether it's in the middle or north or south or whatever.
Not sure myself. Yeah.
But the prosciutto and salami and all of the cured stuff, it's meant to last a long time. It's like, so much better than jerky. But the same kind of idea is preserving it a certain way so that you can eat it forever, basically, and you're not going to be without food.
Right.
In more northern parts of Europe, it might have been more difficult to do that process, or maybe it just didn't take on. Maybe it just didn't, sort of catch on. And they had more lamb. They had a lot of sheeps over there. So maybe sort of dry curing, aging type processes were more favorable back then.
Yeah, it sounds like it has to be older. I would imagine, or let's go a little darker on this, keeping with the cold shoulder thing, if you serve mutton, it's not that old.
Right. How dare.
Anyway.
How dare you serve me?
The audacity, the unmitigated gall. Okay, go ahead.
New mutton.
Yeah. Is this new mutton or old mutton?
Yeah. Oh God, so like new money or old money.
That's right. Yeah,
you can always tell new mutton because of their shoes.
Yeah.
Straight from the horse's mouth. Speaking of animals that we don't really eat much anymore.
Yep.
So straight from the horse's mouth. could have originated around the turn of the 20th century, so kind of new. The earliest printed version from the London newspaper, it was Reynolds newspaper, June 1896, quote, "As the great British nation takes far more interest in horse racing than in politics, the exchange of rulers would be delightful. Because, look you, we'd get all our tips straight from the horses' mouths, instead of being deluded and swindled every day by their lordly owners." Damn.
Mhm.
Somebody's getting feisty there in the newspaper. I love
Yeah.
I love old newspapers. You could say so much more back then. Yeah, so I mean, it suggests that the paper's readers were expected to be familiar with it, so they already use it. They didn't use it like sort of like this is what this means. So maybe there were earlier examples. One possible meaning is that it suggests that it comes from the horse racing world. As you know, horse races are a source of betting, and a lot of people bet very strategically for a horse. You have a lot of information you can get on the horse before you bet. People get really like super into it. Knowing as much as you can about the horse or the owner or the rider can be important. So getting a tip from a reliable source would be valuable. And so it was thought that if a tipster would say either to exaggerate or to emphasize the great source of info, that he got it straight from the horse's mouth, it would be the best source of info because it comes from the actual horse. Now, I'm sure no one believed that the horse told the guy some intel unless you're talking about Mr. Ed. But the exaggeration makes sense. And for any of our listeners who are not my dad's age, Mr. Ed was a TV show in which they had a talking horse.
That's right.
Yeah, and it was a real horse, and they used to give him peanut butter so that he'd move his mouth a lot. And then some guy used to talk, and they said the horse is talking. Yeah, so that's Mr. Ed. I had to explain that to some people not too long ago because there are people who don't know what Mr. Ed is, and it's very sad that time is going by. So another option is that in horse trading, same kind of idea of good intel straight from a horse, except literally, which is also possibly where not looking a gift horse in the mouth comes from. Not looking a gift horse in the mouth is referring to like if someone gave you a horse as a gift, it would be kind of rude to like check out his teeth and his mouth, see if he was healthy, right? You're supposed to just kind of take it. But so maybe in this case, knowing good info about a horse trade that came straight from the horse's mouth, meaning, oh, I've looked at his mouth, he's a good one, might make sense. It seems a little weaker than the other one, but I mean, who am I? I'm not a horse trader, right? I'm not sure.
Yeah, but you lived in Ocala for a while.
I did, not as long as you. And you live in the horsey part of Ocala.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Yep. I lived in the manatee part of Ocala.
Yeah.
So I know a little more about manatees than horses. I did ride horses when I was a kid.
Yep.
And I fell off them and hurt my shoulder, and now my shoulder is never the same ever. Yeah. So I think it's a pretty simple one. I think it probably comes from horse betting. Somebody saying like, "Hey, listen, I know some good things about this horse, and I know because the horse told me himself." Like I could see a dude saying that, and everybody understanding that means I know what I'm talking about because I've been there. And it could have meant that he checked out the horse and saw that it was healthy. Because I guess apparently I don't know a lot about horses, but I do watch that veterinary program that's really cool. I don't know, it's this guy. He's somewhere in the Midwest, but he's from the Netherlands, and he's a country vet, and they do a lot of horse stuff on there. But I do know that horses' mouths are very critical to their health. Like they have to like file down their teeth a lot. You could tell a lot from their gums whether they're sick, and
it's a good point. Yeah,
things like that. So I imagine that looking a gift horse in the mouth and also getting something from the horse's mouth may have derived from somebody knowing that the horse is healthy, and therefore probably a good bet for the race, maybe. And it's just like anything else. It's like you could equate it to, I don't know, like football betting or any other sports betting, where if you're into sports and you're into sports betting, most people who bet on sports, they don't just kind of guess who's going to win. They kind of know everything about all the players. They know exactly when their injuries were. They know what their record is. They know like, yeah, this one's got a problem with his knee, so that he always has an issue with this particular thing. So if they do this play, he's not going to do well with that. So like, I can understand people betting on horses because it's a sport. Like getting into the minutia of all the little details of needing to know everything about the horse itself before betting. So I kind of get that one. So folks, I guess that'll do it for another episode, another sort of journey into the origins of phrases that didn't really have any good answers. But I guess we were entertained along the way. I hope you guys were. I know we were. We had a lot of fun with this. So if you're having fun and if you're still enjoying yourself, please let us know. Depending on where you listen to this podcast, you can leave a comment on certain venues. If you're listening to Apple Podcasts, please leave us a review and a rating because it would help us a lot, help us get some more people listening. If you don't want to do any of those things and you're inclined to open up your email in your browser, please send us an email at mocciaverse@gmail.com. That's MOCCIAVERSE@gmail.com. And let us know what you think or give us suggestions for future episodes. Tell us what you'd like us to talk about, if anything. Tell us how we're doing, if we're entertaining to you. Or send us a picture of something you think is funny, pictures of cats or dogs, or really anything at this point. We're desperate. Not really. I mean, we're just having fun here. Please do. And please keep listening and tell everybody you know how awesome this podcast is if you think it's awesome. Unless we have anything else we need to say, I think it's time for me to get tortured by my dad.
Waiting all day for this.
I know you have.
April showers bring May flowers. But what do May flowers bring?
Pilgrims. I know that one.
There you go. How do you make a tissue dance?
Oh, how?
Yeah, I know. Put a little boogie in it.
Oh, that's disgusting.
Yeah. What's a funny mountain called? Hilarious.
Oh, no.
What do you call a song about a tortilla? A rap.
Oh. Okay.
Okay.
I like that one.
That was a good one. Yeah, where do pirates buy hooks?
Where?
A secondhand store.
Oh God, that's terrible.
And this child refused to nap.
Uh-huh.
She was found guilty of resisting arrest.
Oh, okay.
And why did the tomato blush?
I know this one. It saw the salad dressing.
Yes.
Okay.
And on that note.
Yeah, that's enough.
Okay.
All right, guys. Thanks for joining us again, and we will see you in 2 weeks. Bye.
Bye.
Daddy wasn't finding a powwow. Daddy wasn't finding a powwow. I've got a little cat. I'm very fond of that. I'd rather have a big powwow.
I told my coworker once about how you used to always say, "Hey, you," with the face.
Yeah.
And he thought it's the greatest thing ever. And he says it all the time now.
Yeah.
You with the face.
Yeah.
Hey, I have a face.
Yeah.
It must be me.
Yeah.
That's
You
great.
talking to me?
Yeah. Well, there's no one else here, so you must be talking to me. Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Now you want to work, printer? Like an hour later?
It's a summertime printer.
Yeah, go lay down.
You know the summertime printer is, right?
A summertime
at work.
Summertime it works and summertime it doesn't.
There you go.
We're supposed to save those for the end.
Oh, sorry.